With all the focus recently on the attempted assassination of President Donald Trump, and then the RNC big convention that they had, and now all this issue with Biden dropping out of the race and what's going to happen with that. A lot of things have been going on here domestically. We've been focusing a lot on that, but there's also a war going on in between Russia and Ukraine that has not stopped, and things are continuing to go along there. And we haven't brought you any updates on that for a while, so we felt that it was important to bring that to you today. And a lot of the information is not good. A lot of the flow of things is continuing to go in a really bad direction, in my view, and that's not just on the battlefields. That's in the Western capitals, and maybe even more so in there, because the results of what a lot of these people are doing that make no sense at all is resulting on more Ukrainian people being killed by the day. So we're going to get into that. And to help us unpack a lot about what's going on, we have Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst, and just a great guy who knows a lot about all of these issues, is on top of a lot of them. So really glad to have you back on here again today, Larry.
Thank you, Danny. It's always a pleasure and an honor.
And it's certainly a pleasure and honor to see what shirt you're going to wear today. And so
yeah.
it's now I know a lot of our viewers are like wondering what's he going to wear today. So that's part of the allure of having you on the show here. But on some serious topics here, I want to start off with something that was just in the news here in the last day or so, from Ukraine itself, from their commanding general, General Syrskyi. He comes out and really rather boldly says, I know we will win, and how Ukraine's top general on turning the tables against Russia. So he's going to tell everybody that he knows that they're going to win, and he knows how they're going to win. And I want to read you just a little bit of that article, because I found it really curious. Because I mean, when I first saw that, my eyebrows went up, and I'm like, what are you talking about that you're going to win and you know how? So I thought, well, let's see what he has. Maybe he has some magic beans or something. I don't know. But here's what he says. First of all, the article says that he, quote, acknowledges that the Russians are much better resourced. They have more of everything: tanks, infantry, fighting vehicles, soldiers. Their original 100,000 strong invasion force has grown to 520,000, Syrskyi said, with a goal of, by the end of this year, just under 700,000 men, Russians, in Ukraine, not in the Russian army, but specifically in Ukraine. Then separately, he says, the article goes on and says, since 2022, the number of Russian tanks has doubled, according to Syrskyi, from 1,700 to 3,500. Artillery systems have tripled. Armored personnel carriers has gone up from 4,500 to 8,900. Then, quote, the enemy has a significant advantage in force and resources, Syrskyi said. So right there, you're going, okay, well, you acknowledge that there's a lot of difficulty here and a very high bar to cross. So presumably at some point in the rest of the article, if he says he knows they're going to win and how, he's going to show how they can offset all of those huge numbers: tanks, personnel carriers, soldiers, etc. But then it says that Syrskyi said that Kiev had a plan to get Crimea back more than a decade after Putin illegally annexed it. And was this really feasible? The author writes, quote, it's realistic. Of course, it's a big military secret, the general said. And then he continued, we will do everything we can to reach the internationally recognized borders of 1991. And so for the rest of that article, there was nothing in there about how. I mean, that was part of the title, and how. So I'm just wondering what in the world could be in his mind, given the state of play today, the fact that Biden just dropped out of the race. The likelihood of Trump winning is quite high right now. And we know what he's going to do if he gets into office on this war. What is he basing this off of, do you think?
Well, I think what happened, and you sort of alluded to it there. The guy who was writing the lines for Biden, you know, that Biden is sharp as a tack, Biden's on top of his game, Biden's as mentally fit as he can. He lost his job when Biden said, okay, I'm not running, and he went to work for the Ukrainians. That's the only explanation.
Okay, well, that makes a little more sense at least.
Yeah. I mean, look, I am being, facetious, but this is typical of Western propaganda, trying to prop up a narrative that is completely collapsing before their eyes. It is the parallels of it's almost like Joe Biden is a picture of Dorian Gray. Everything that happens to him is now also happening to Ukraine. That as Biden collapses, so too does the collapse of Ukraine accelerate. Because what, Sirski in that opening paragraph outlined exactly what all of the military advantages that Russia has right now, and doesn't comment on the fact that Ukraine is losing upwards of 2,000 men a day. So, a brigade a day goes away. They don't have limitless brigades. So, if you've in June alone, I think the death toll was 55,000, which is horrendous. That's almost as many people as we lost in Vietnam over 15, 20 years.
Yeah. And it's also interesting in that same article, in addition to pointing to the Russian strengths, he also acknowledged their big challenge in personnel, and that they said that they're not able to recruit all the number of people that they have. So that would again seem to lead to, and so we need to seek a negotiated solution. Now I'm going to talk about that later in the show here, but to me, just the photograph here, the title, I know we will win and how, just speaks of this extraordinary and disconcerting arrogance on the part of this guy to have the audacity to come and say that, when all of the facts that he himself identifies scream the opposite.
Right.
But I'm wondering, Larry, where he may have learned this arrogance from, because I have a few examples here to show you, and I'd like you to comment on these as we play them, because he has the masters of arrogance and probably propaganda, as you probably aptly put it a second ago, are on display right here in the good old U.S. of A. So let's first of all look what Anthony Blinken said to great applause during the NATO conference a week or two back.
As we speak, the transfer of F-16 jets is underway, coming from Denmark, coming from the Netherlands, and those jets will be flying in the skies of Ukraine this summer to make sure that Ukraine can continue to effectively defend itself against the Russian aggression.
Okay, F-16s, Larry. That's finally going to be the silver bullet we've all been looking for that'll allow Ukraine to protect its skies. True or false?
Yeah, that's not going to happen. What? Let me suggest another alternative, and I'm serious about this. That whoever wrote this article and put that headline up there for Sirski, even though they accurately reported what Sirski said, that putting that kind of headline up is designed actually to try to undermine Sirski, to expose him as somebody who is delusional, setting him up to be blamed. That he will be the scapegoat when they finally decide to pull the plug on him, because this kind of messaging, I know there's some bad editors out there, but there's no way you can read that article and then come up with that as your headline or your main quote. It would be just the opposite based upon what he said. So clearly, whoever put that out, they put it out with a deliberate effort that, even Helen Keller could see that this was an effort to discredit him. Yeah.
And so what about Blinken's comments there? Again, this is just recently. This is just less than 2 weeks ago.
Hey, he got all excited from watching, Tom Cruise and Top Gun, and he's got a man crush on Cruise. What can I tell you? Oh, you're going to fly some F-16s or those F-18s. Well, it's a number, but it's a plane with wings, and it's gonna change everything. Meanwhile, Russia announced with an Iskander missile that it took out 50 Western trainers, not mercenaries, but trainers, official military personnel. Other reports I've seen indicate at least 18 British Special Air Service, SAS guys dead. Another contingent of French Special Operations soldiers dead. And so you've got that. Then you have the Russians have really broken through now in Donetsk. It's not, they're not making 100 yards a day. They're taking kilometers and big chunks of kilometers. And Sirski's troops it's not that he's facing one cauldron or kettle, as they call it, the pocket of soldiers surrounded. They've got at least 5 in Donetsk alone. And so just from a military planning standpoint, they got to figure out how do they organize a retreat. And then the Russians are cutting the main lines of supply that they've relied upon, the Ukrainians have relied on for the last, good Lord, 10 years. So we are really on the brink of watching a complete collapse of the Ukrainian military effort in the nets, which I think is one of the reasons, and you're going to talk about it later, that the Ukrainians are now showing up in China saying, hey, Bethel's peace talks. You know what? Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, we will talk about that in a second, but I got a few more things that I need to discuss here. This one is looking backwards a little bit and saying, we're in some of the straits we are in now because of what we haven't done earlier. And the biggest advocate of this is Brother John Bolton, who, on the one hand, almost like that Newsweek piece, recognizes and acknowledges the math problem, but then apparently wasn't very good in math. Watch this.
I think if Trump's elected president, the conflict was likely to end very quickly to Ukraine's disadvantage. But this is part of the Biden administration's failure. When you have one country that's roughly 3.5 times bigger than the other country in the conflict fighting a war of attrition, it's just a matter of arithmetic before we decide who wins. This is a reflection of the failure to provide assistance on a strategic basis, having an objective in mind. We say it's the complete restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. And yet it's only now, 2.5 years into the war, that we've made a decision to provide F-16s to the Ukrainians. At the beginning of the war, we wouldn't even let Poland transfer their aging MiGs to the Ukraine. So it's been a large measure of our incompetence in assisting the Ukrainians that has led to this gridlock.
So, well, two things there. First of all, he says we're in a gridlock, but you just described something that does not sound like a gridlock to me. But the second thing, he says that we should have been providing F-16s and really everything else from the beginning. But let me just ask on that second part first. Could we have provided everything that they were talking from the beginning? Would we have had the ability to do that if we wanted to?
No. I mean, who's going to fly the damn planes? Ukrainians weren't trained to fly F-16s. Could have given them a bunch. They still wouldn't have been capable. But what he's ignoring is the fact that Russia, within the first 24 hours of the start of that special military operation, took out much of the ground-based radars, and the air intercept capabilities of the Ukrainians were dependent upon those ground-based radars. So right off the bat, Ukraine was at a deficit in terms of its ability to fly combat air operations against the Russians. The Russians were limited in their ability to use extensive fixed-wing aircraft early on in the special military operation deep inside Ukraine, because Ukraine still had a bunch of S-300 legacy Soviet air defense systems that were still pretty damn good. And it took the Russians a course of about 18 months to start really chewing those up, so that we remember by February a year ago, in February 2023, that they were already, the U.S. intelligence was assessing Ukraine's ability to continue to defend itself from the air was deteriorating. Now, look, Bolton's a moron. He is an erudite, overeducated moron. He knows nothing of military affairs other than the fact that he avoided service in Vietnam, but he has no damn problem sending your son or daughter to fight a war that he wants to start. People like him infuriate me.
Yeah, I can see, and I can understand why too. But let's look at the second part of what he said there about the basically it's in a he didn't say the word stalemate. I can't remember the one he used, but basically that's where it is. We are in a stalemate. Are we in a stalemate?
Hey, anybody who's played chess knows that a stalemate means both sides have reached a position where they don't have any additional moves. So when you don't have any additional moves, that's a stalemate. Russia's got a whole pack of moves. They've got troops stationed up in Belarus that they haven't moved. They've got 700,000 troops that are already in place. They're moving. They've got another 700,000 troops in the training pipeline right now. We're looking at a total force of 1.4 million. They're not lacking in artillery. They're not lacking in tanks. They're not lacking in drones. And they're not lacking in missiles. They're both ballistic and cruise. On every one of those, Ukraine's lacking, including the manpower especially. And these people say, oh, that's a stalemate. It's like, I don't think you know what that word means. It's just, if that's their definition of stalemate, I'd love to play chess with them, because it'd be an easy mark.
Okay, so it's not just Hodges. I'm sorry, it's not just Bolton, by the way, but also, and I hate to pick on him because it's kind of an easy target here, but General Ben Hodges, who continues to get premium space at popular major media outlets, and we're going to show a couple of different shots of him here today. But here's the first one where he's just saying, you know what? Despite everything you just said, Russia can't win. Watch this.
There's nothing they can do. They do not have the ability to knock Ukraine out of the war. Now, they're going to continue losing 1,000 soldiers a day because they don't care about their own casualties. But I don't think that this is endless. I mean, even their manpower is not endless. And certainly their industry, even if we don't get serious about sanctions and about cutting off their ability to ship oil, I don't know that they can go another 2 years.
We have another math problem here, because you could almost see the wheels turning in his mind as he's saying, even with their industry, I don't think they can. And he's like, oh, wait a minute, their industry can keep going for a long time because they're not being bombed like those in the Ukraine side are. And so, but then he's like, well, but anyway, they're still not going to win. What do you say when you hear stuff like that?
The fact that someone like Hodges could be promoted to 3 stars and occupy a position of command in the U.S. military, it helps explain why the United States hasn't won a war since World War II. Okay, so we beat the Panamanians, woohoo! and we vanquished the Iraqis. Oh boy. At least John Bolton has.
And I'll point out, those were battles. We won battles. We did not win any of those wars.
Exactly. And it is, Bolton at least has an excuse. He has no military experience. He made sure he didn't get any of that. Shied away from that. Much rather have other people die than put his own ass on the line. Hodges doesn't have that excuse. And so, this isn't about Larry Johnson's opinion. I mean, what we're looking at are some objective facts on the ground in terms of both industrial capability. Go back and look at the predictions that were made 2 years ago about what was going to happen to Russia's economy. I was arguing then with some so-called noted economists, one guy out of Harvard, who were claiming, oh boy, this is going to collapse Russia's economy. And it's like, do you not understand the concept that when you are self-sufficient, if you've got a supply of food and water in your house, and you've got your own source of electricity, it doesn't matter if the police have you surrounded and barricaded. You've got food, you've got water, you've got electricity. So you can continue living, and they're just outside. It's a completely different situation where you can surround somebody and cut them off from all sources of life. And these clowns like Hodges keep pretending that Russia is just some bankrupt, backward country that has no other options and is entirely dependent upon pumping oil. If you cut off that oil, man, they're done. I mean, that kind of ignorance is inexcusable in a man like Hodges, who's got a working, functioning brain and can read. So, when they choose to be that willfully ignorant and in the process compromise the security of the United States by encouraging us to get in fights that we cannot win, that's what they don't understand.
Well, and man, I wish I could just leave it at that one that doesn't understand. But I mean, they're really, and you're going to start seeing this with some of the other clips we played. It seems like there's a concerted effort at the top to continue to, I don't know if it's bamboozle the American public or just keep convincing them that no, don't listen to what all these other people are saying and don't look at what your eyes are seeing. Listen to us. Follow my voice here. Just look at my eyes. And who better than to do that than Victoria Nuland, who had this to say about the nature of NATO. Check this out.
NATO does not attack countries. It will defend its territory, it will defend its partners and allies, but it does not come for you unless you come for us. And it is Putin who has made NATO stronger, bigger, more forward deployed because he's posed a threat to us.
So let's just review the bidding, as we used to say in the military here. So we don't go after you unless you come after us. So since Russia was the aggressor by her definition, then NATO's just sitting out there probably having a picnic one day, and then bam, out of nowhere, all of a sudden here comes all these Russian colonies in Ukraine for no reason at all. Do you buy that?
Well, no. And so let me ask you a question. I know you're Army, but you do have some understanding of Marine Corps amphibious operations.
I do.
Do you consider a Marine Corps landing in an amphibious craft on the beaches of the Black Sea shores of Ukraine, is that a defensive or an offensive operation?
Best I can tell, it's an offensive.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's exactly what the United States was doing with NATO exercise every year up until like 2019 with what was called Operation Seabreeze. And their videos were on YouTube. I don't know if they're still up because they realized, the West realized, oh, that's sort of inconvenient. There was also one of the first bases that Russia struck early on in the special military operation in Yavoriv, which is out in western Ukraine. That was a de facto NATO base, and there was online talking about cyber warfare training that NATO did for the Ukrainians, and in it described how we're training them in offensive operations. So it's just a polite way of saying Victoria Nuland once again demonstrate that she's an abject liar.
And then you also have to add in there that I want to say it was somewhere between April and June 2021. I can't remember the exact month, where the Ukrainian parliament, with Zelensky at the top in the government, passed a law that said they were going to retake all of the areas that had been covered by Russia from 2014 to include Crimea by force if necessary. And then over the next number of months, and especially right up before February, the number of Ukrainian troops really grew up around some of the Donetsk area, and the artillery rounds started firing at a lot higher rates. And look, the record is clear. Russia is the one that invaded Ukraine, and you can't get around that. And I don't think anybody in Russia tries to get around it. But what you cannot say is that it was completely unprovoked. There was no reason for it. Right. There was a lot of things that were going on there, none of which we want to talk about today.
Yeah, it was all what happened in 2021 in the lead up was preceded by 9 more years of aggression towards Russia. And the United States, this plan, this operation to try to take Russia apart, to destabilize it, it goes back to post World War II. It started really in 1947, 48 with the remnants of the OSS, and when the CIA finally brought on board the former head of German intelligence, a guy named Reinhard Gehlen, and then we launched an attempt to launch an insurgency in Ukraine in the early 50s. And those activities have continued through the CIA up until today. And it was with the CIA and the British involved with the Maidan in February 2014. So, Russia is not delusional and schizophrenic or psychotic. They're actually facing an attack. They're actually facing serious threats. And the West has made, instead of finding a way to negotiate, Russia was very upfront saying, look, don't expand NATO. Why don't you let us join NATO and we can all agree that we'll, be one big happy team. Oh, no. We can't do that because once we eliminate Russia as an enemy, how the hell are we going to justify an $800 billion defense budget? We got some military industrial corporations that have got to be kept in business.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it is a lot of business. I want to look at something else here. Now, you mentioned at the top of this that there's some negotiations that going on right now, and that Minister of Foreign Affairs Kuleba is in Beijing, I think, as we speak right now. Talk about that in a second. But it was also discussed by Hodges just 4 days ago, General Hodges, when people were asking him about the possibility of negotiated settlement. And he had this rather interesting take on the dangers of negotiation for Ukraine. Watch this.
But I cannot imagine that any serious Ukrainian political leader believes that they could have a successful negotiation with Russia where they wouldn't have to worry about it again in 2 or 3 years where Russia would be back at it, particularly if part of the negotiation meant that Russia kept Crimea. I mean, as long as Russia has Crimea, Ukraine could never, even after they liberate Berdyansk and Mariupol, they'd never be able to use those ports again because Russia would control access in and out of Azov Sea. And they would always be in position to disrupt commerce going in and out of Odessa, for example.
So he's talking about Russia would come back in. If Russia had a negotiated settlement, then later on they would come back and go to war again with Ukraine, like they would launch a new war here. And I think that it's really, let me not put words in your mouth. Do you think, let me make a simpler question, that if there was a negotiated settlement, let's say that the one that Putin offered on, I think it was the 6th of June, where he said, we'll take all 4 of the oblasts, you withdraw all your troops out of those, and then you will not be in NATO, independence and unaligned, then we'll have negotiated settlement to end the war. Let's say that that was the one that they somehow agreed to. Do you see a position that Russia would later on come back and start a new war?
Russia's own, again, this was from Russia's standpoint, a war of defense, a war of self-preservation. I think where the negotiations on this are headed, Russia's not going to conclude a deal that does not include it being in control of Odessa. They've made that clear now. They understand this, that we are going to preserve and protect the rights of the Russian speakers in Ukraine. And then Odessa is like 90% Russian speaking. The Ukrainians now, I think that this current bid with sending Kuleba to get the Chinese involved, I think it's just a ploy. I think it's part born out of desperation because they see the political winds shifting against them in the United States. A buddy of mine who left the Marine Corps as a major, was a State Department and counterterrorism shop, became the Deputy Assistant Secretary in counterterrorism, and he was one of the whistleblowers on Benghazi. He's now retired, lives in Iowa, is a member of the legislature there, but he's been to a couple of, let's call them political town halls, one by a local member of Congress and one by Senator Grassley. And he says at every single one, the first question out of the mouths of people are, why the hell are we spending all this money in Ukraine? What about taking care of us at home? That's what the voters are saying. Now, Grassley did a nice tap dance pointing out, we got this over in Rock Island, near Illinois. We're building shells and it's good for jobs. But the message is being sent. The American people have had enough of this. And so the Ukrainians are going, yeah, we're not seeing the tidal wave. Everyone's not wearing their Ukraine lapel pins anymore, or Save Ukraine out in the front yard. That's history. And I think they're recognizing the odds of them getting jettisoned and left to their own devices is coming up. So yeah, put out the feelers on negotiation, but that doesn't change how the Russians are going to approach it, because the Russians are not in a position of weakness now. They're in a position of great strength. They have resources that all they got to do is dial up the pressure and cause more pain for Ukraine, pain that Ukraine's not going to be able to endure.
Later in that same interview with Hodges, he also addressed Russian air power, which I found a little bit odd, given the evidence that we have and what has been observed on the ground. I think from the very beginning of the war, it's been pretty clear that the Ukrainian Air Force has made just a handful of token runs here and there, but because Russia has a lot more air defense systems, they have been far less active or so. On the Russian Air Force side, there's been some claims that they have, quote, and I think he's going to say it here, failed to achieve air superiority or air supremacy, implying that they have failed. But I'm not sure that's the case. Watch what he said here.
I just keep thinking, after 10 and a half years of war, Russia still controls less than 20% of Ukraine. Their Air Force has failed its two most important tasks of air superiority and interdiction. The Navy is in retreat or underwater, and they've lost 500,000 soldiers. Why would we press Ukraine to stop? Why aren't we helping them? Why aren't we doing things to accelerate their ability to defeat Russia?
That gets back to your comment a second ago. Like you were saying, yeah, send more Ukrainian men to die in larger numbers. That's cool because Russia's going to lose. But let's look first of all at a couple of components there. He claims that the Russian Air Force has completely failed to have air superiority or to have interdiction missions. And yet it seems to me that Russia has complete dominance over the entire Ukraine with its air power or missile forces, especially. And in terms of their air power, that's what these FAB bombs are just decimating the entire front line. And I don't see any response on the Ukraine side. So what is he talking about?
Yeah, man, I'll tell you what, Ben, I'll pay for your ticket. I'll send you to Ukraine. And just as long as you agree to go to the front lines, where you're going to be completely safe from that decimated Russian air power. If you put it in those terms and give him that chance, I guarantee you he won't go because he knows the truth. What he's doing is he's portraying what is happening to Ukraine. He's presenting as if that's what's happening to Russia. It's not happening to Russia. He's describing Ukraine's situation. It's Ukraine that's got more than 500,000 soldiers dead, not Russia. Russia's dead probably between 70 to 100,000. Not inconsequential, but they've been fighting a war not against Ukraine, but also against NATO. And that's the thing that, Hodges is just an enabler, along with, you got Petraeus, you got a whole legion of these guys. And it's just, unfortunately, it's an indictment of the failure of military leadership. But it's not just confined to this. Just very, very quickly off topic. Pete Blaber, who was a Delta Force commander, great guy. He's done a presentation on the cover up that was done in the murder of but the friendly fire death of Pat Tillman in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that was a failure of chain of command, up to and including Stan McChrystal, where they lied and they shut. And so it's not just confined to Ben Hodges and Petraeus, man. This is endemic in this group of officers who've been in control for the last 15 years. And
But
America's in real trouble with those clowns.
That I still have a hard time even understanding. I don't have a hard time understanding that people are somehow just bereft of morality and they don't have any problem continuing to say, yeah, send somebody else's kid in to continue to die in large numbers. But at some point, and it seems to me that we're rapidly approaching that point to where you can't keep the fiction going too much longer when it'll be obvious that none of those things are true. And how can you sleep with yourself by what he just said there 4 days ago, I think, or maybe that was a bit earlier. No, that was the one from 4 days ago on the 20th of July. He's still saying, keep on sending those Ukrainian men into battle. And even if he's capable, his capabilities are limited. He was a 3-star general. He does have basic understanding. And he sees the reality. You just mentioned it. He does see that all of these Ukraine people are dying in large numbers, that the Ukraine doesn't have the air defense to defend themselves, and that they're continually being pushed back. Why would he keep just saying send more?
Yeah. I don't think in his career he ever actually had to write a condolence letter to a family that lost a son or a daughter because of combat actions taken under his command. That's part of the problem. For this guy, it's just like a video game to him. Not that he ever played video games, but he doesn't appreciate or even consider the actual human cost. Because what Ukraine is experiencing, it's not just this immediate loss of manpower. This is going to be a multi-generational destruction of Ukraine, because the men being killed are the men who are in their reproductive years. So they're not having babies or getting killed on the front line. So you're going to have that hole in the middle of the demographic chart. And once that hole appears, that cascades down going into the years to come. And here's Ben Hodges cheering it on. And I think it's sort of too late for Ukraine. The trajectory of what's going to happen is already set in stone. It's just a matter of the time has to play out. It's like you go to the doctor and he say, hey, you got stage 4 cancer. Wish we had better news for you, but cancer is going to eat its way out and you're going to be dead here in 6 months, 3 months. That's Ukraine's situation.
And now let's look a little bit more carefully at what you've mentioned a couple of times now about this move in China. So Kuleba right now is in China, and he says they're, quote, looking for common ground. And it's not clear which common ground they're talking about. Is it the China version? Is it the Ukraine version that they want China on their side? I wonder, first of all, if you have any knowledge about what Kuleba is really trying to do there. Is he genuinely trying to get China to abandon Russia and come over to their side and negotiate on their behalf? Or is he actually trying to say, hey, what is the bottom line here? What do we need to do to get this over with? What's your view?
Yeah, no, I think there's a part of them that's genuinely trying to see if they can get China to help get Russia to the table and give them at least some hope of having conditions that they can live with. But China's going to be an honest broker in this process, but Russia's not going to surrender itself. Russia's done with trusting any promises or guarantees by the Ukrainians or by anybody in the West at this point, because the West has consistently lied. And, right now, if I'm a Russian, particularly general in the Stavka, looking at this, I said, hey, they realize we're going to crush them in the next 2 months, and they're just trying to stall us. Hopefully that we slow down. So I see Russia accelerating what it's going to do, and they're going to accelerate it up until like the middle of September. And then on the eve, when the rains come and the muddy fields return to the Donbass and the rest of Ukraine, they'll be able to stop and recognize that Ukrainians will not be in a position to mount any counteroffensive, and yet it will still leave the Russian forces intact so that they can continue to deliver long-range fires, along with combat the fixed-wing aircraft delivering the FABs. And it's, again, the war of attrition is not going to stop. And at some point, the mathematics compel Ukraine to surrender. That's what's on the horizon.
Yeah, and so let's look at that. So right now you have, okay, so we had a couple of months back, this so-called Swiss Peace Summit, to where Ukraine had all these countries come from around the world, I think 90 representatives or something like that, except for Russia, obviously. And now then Zelensky's saying, well, you know what, let's do another one. And this time I'm going to allow Russia to come. So it almost sounds like he's starting to waffle a little bit. I mean, it's almost embarrassing to suggest that Russia would go, okay, thank you for inviting me. Sure, we'll come and talk. I mean, that just seems laughable on the surface. But what's not so laughable, especially from the Ukrainian side, is what Dmitry Medvedev has been saying. And here just a few days back, he's implying that, and this is reported by Reuters here, that he's saying that they want the disappearance of Ukraine and or NATO. And he's saying that they're not going to negotiate anything. They don't want to discuss anything. Now then, they've just decided they're going to take on the battlefield whatever they want and then issue terms of surrender, when you read into some of the details of what he said. Now, I know Larry Lott in the West has said, oh, Medvedev's a clown. He's just full of hyperbole. Don't even listen to what he says. Others I've talked to say you do that at your peril. Where do you come down on that?
At your peril. The man was president of Russia. He was the prime minister of Russia. He is now the number 2 in the National Security Council, our equivalent of the NSC. He can sometimes be sort of the bad cop to Putin's good cop, but what he says reflects not his opinion alone. It reflects a broad spectrum of the Russian political, military, and economic elite. And to ignore what he says, you ignore it at your peril. So, and that's why I say that the Zelensky wants to be in control of a peace process negotiation. That's not going to happen. Russia's got too much invested in this now, and the war is going its way. Because they're not seeing NATO coming together and saying, yes, we must all stand united. Let's all hook up. Nah, you've got, Ukraine's doing everything it can to piss off Hungary and Slovakia. Yeah, we're going to cut off your oil. And they'll turn around and say, okay, we'll cut off your money. And Hungary can say, we'll one up you. We'll also cut off your electricity. Because right now, Ukraine is dependent upon electricity coming from Hungary. I mean, how stupid can they be? The Ukrainians, not the Hungarians. So you've got that split developing within NATO. You've got the political chaos with, Keir Starmer. I mean, he's sort of like he's the Lindsey Graham of England, I guess. And then, Macron's not much better. And we'll see if there are any disasters at the Olympics, which start in a week. And then you've got this political circus in the United States where, Cackles Kamala is, being teed up to be the leader of the free world. That's almost as hilarious as Joe Biden pretending that he is. So against that entire backdrop, if you're a Russian intelligence analyst, you're looking at this trying to figure out, okay, is this some secret Western ploy to make us think that they're completely incompetent and coming apart at the seams? Or is this the real thing? And I go, no, it's the real thing. We're not smart enough to dream up a ploy like this.
I want to ask you something on that. Speaking, you kind of touched on it a second ago about what may be coming. If this possibly is what Medvedev had in mind when he was talking about it. You also specified, in your view, Russia probably is not going to stop until they get Odessa, which would be a major military operation, given that, truly Russia hasn't taken any more than 20%, and they've been inching along at different spots along that front line. To take Odessa would require then them crossing the Dnieper River with major combat forces, and whether they're going to invest the city or siege it is a separate issue, but that would also require a large number of people. How do you see let's say the next few months, let's say that up to the American election in November, so 3 or 4 months from now, do you see Russia unleashing a large operation that it hasn't done to scale? You alluded to the fact that there could be hundreds of thousands of Russian troops in the nearby area that still have not been in contact, that they would risk a, quote, big arrow operation to try and punch a hole through somewhere to try to collapse the Ukrainian defenses? Or do you think that they'll just continue on with this meter by meter or kilometer by kilometer slow push to see until something collapses? How do you see it?
Yeah, I don't see any big arrow offensives coming until they can eliminate the drone threat. And as long as the drone threat exists, they're going to continue to do like they did in Kharkiv. What I have seen, though, is they are conducting brigade-size exercises right now with doing river crossings with portable bridges that go up, lay the bridges out, get units across. So that they're already exercising, preparing that. And I think that's being done for places both like in Odessa and Mykolaiv, down in the Zaporizhia, Kherson area. Now, Russia, though, is not. They're not going to according to what I call traditional Western approach, where we would think that we would mass forces and rush an armored column through a gap. They recognize the face of warfare has changed, and it really has fundamentally. With the drone warfare is the game changer. It's as sort of as important in this particular war as the coming of age of aircraft carriers during World War II was in changing the face of battle, at least in the Pacific. The thing is, the Russians hold lots of cards. And they continue to do the maskirovka, to mask what they're doing, provide feints, and it's more difficult in an era of let's call it complete ISR.
Yeah,
where countries have this intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capability to detect troop movements and massing of forces. But it's a two-edged sword. Yeah, the West can do that to the Russians, but just as the Russians demonstrated the other day, you get 50 Western trainers together in one facility, they're dead. Just like that.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're going to see how that's going to play out. One last question I want to ask you about before we shift gears here a little bit toward the end, because I want to talk about something else that's happening here in Washington, D.C. But I want to ask you more of an intangible question on the Ukraine fighters, because I keep talking about, would the Russian forces just keep pressing until they, the force breaks somewhere? I've mentioned it, I think, several times, even with you on our show, where I say, hey, I think that by the end of the summer, it's not inconceivable that the Ukraine army could break. Given what has happened already in Washington with Biden withdrawing from the race, and now Kamala Harris, likely the next designee for nomination to go against Trump, Trump's elevation of Vance, which is also just as much of let's end this war. And Trump said, I'm going to have it over before I even get into office, et cetera. Given those trajectories, how do you see all of that affecting the morale of the Ukrainian army? Not only are they seeing these huge casualties going on, and they know they've been pushed back really this entire year, every month, methodically pushed back. What is the prospect of them continuing to say it, especially if they see that there's talks from both Zelensky and Kuleba that they are talking about maybe negotiations? Who wants to be the last one to die when you're talking about ending the war? And is there a risk that they'll at some point just stop attacking or stop going, or no, they're not attacking. Will they stop obeying orders to keep going into meat grinders?
Yeah. The Ukrainians are in the position of Scrooge in the Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, where at the outset, when he first meets the ghost of his old partner, Marley, he says, "Marley, speak comfort to me." And Marley replies, "I have none to give." And that's the reality facing Ukraine. They're not getting good news on any front. They're not seeing an energized Congress that's going to pony up more dollars for them. They see Joe Biden, their old buddy, being shuffled off to a retirement home, and cackling Kamala trying to take over, but she's fighting. She's going to be in a fight just to see if she can secure the nomination, and that's going to be occupying the next 3 weeks. It's not clear if or when the F-16s will show up, but as soon as they do, the Russians already have a bounty on them, so it's going to be a contest among Russian Air Force pilots to see who can down the first one, because there's a big paycheck coming for whoever scores that hit. And then the battlefield losses continue, and it'd be one thing if Ukraine had a training pipeline where you were bringing in guys that had just finished 6 months, 7 months of both basic and advanced individual training, and they were highly skilled in their different specialties, whether artillery, mortars, armor, and that those were the guys coming into the line. But that's not what's showing up. There's showing up guys who were 2 or 3 weeks ago walking along the streets before they got grabbed, shoved in the back of a van, and then had a uniform put on, a gun shoved in their hand, and they're out on the front line. And a lot of those guys are looking around going, this is not a good situation. They're surrendering. They're trying to turn themselves over to the Russians as soon as possible. That's only going to accelerate in the coming weeks, I believe. So yes, I think by Labor Day, September, you very well could see a major collapse coming on the Ukrainian army. If the pace of offensive operations by the Russians we see right now continues or increases.
Yeah, that's what I'm watching for as well, and it's just anguishing to me to sit here and acknowledge that however many the real number of casualties, 500,000, I've heard, that seems plausible given the firepower that the Russians have had. Whatever the real number is, doesn't matter, but it's huge, it's massive. Yeah. We know we have photographic evidence of the cemeteries, et cetera. But it just anguishes me to know that the people who are still alive, as we're making this video right now, in between now and September, there is zero possibility that their sacrifice will accomplish anything that will help any of their countrymen. And so how many of them are going to be required by the likes of Hodges or by, Secretary of State Blinken or any of these other people who just say, yeah, y'all just keep on going. And we know the end. I mean, the end almost can't be anything else, but we're just going to keep on shoveling Ukrainian bodies into that, meat grinder.
Well, frankly, the Germans in World War II, that's exactly what they did. Because, it really, even after the Battle of Stalingrad, the fate of Germany was set. It was just a matter of time.
Yeah.
But particularly after Operation Bagration, that took place, started in August of 44. Germany was done, and it was a matter. Yeah, there's more fighting. There were a lot more. There were more casualties on both sides in that process, but it wasn't going to change the outcome. There was nothing unless God Himself showed up on the battlefield and said, "Okay, everybody, blowing the whistle, lay down your weapons. We're going to all have a group hug." Barring that, the outcome was determined, and that's where we are right now.
I agree.
So and in the process, the real question for me is, will NATO survive this? Because apart from what, let's assume that regardless of what happens to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, even if they lose and Kamala Harris wins office, or whoever the Democrats put in place, there's not the enthusiasm and the political support that sees NATO as this essential element that must be kept intact.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see on that. But as we close here, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit. We talked about what's been going on in Washington politically. You just were referring to the Democratic change of head of who's running on their ticket. But there's something else going on in Washington here in the last this week, actually. And there was another one today with the FBI Director Wray on the hot seat today after the resignation of Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle yesterday, after her testimony on Monday. Now, when she testified, there was one important thing that she didn't say, which I've been talking about on the show here when we do some updates on that, about the assassination attempt against Trump on the 13th of July. How many shell casings were found by the alleged shooter, Thomas Crooks? And I say alleged because we still don't have any concrete proof that he actually did shoot. We know he was up on top of the roof. We know he's been killed. We know he had the rifle, but there's still some evidence that has not been presented that can confirm whether he did or whether he didn't. And it can be concluded, absolutely vital, that it can be shown. If we look at the forensic evidence of bullets that were recovered, et cetera, you can know where that bullet came from, and then you have the weapon that was up there. So you can say with confidence what happened if that information is put out. One of the key pieces of how many shell casings were there fired, because there have been many people have probably seen it. There were 2 batches of shots. There was the first batch of 3, 1, 2, 3. Then there was a pause, and then there was another batch of 6, 5 right in a row, and then a 6th one right after that. So the question is, how many shell casings were on? Cheadle was asked that, and at the time she said, "I know what the answer is. FBI told me, but I'm not going to tell you." And she wouldn't say. So a lot of people raised eyebrows at that. Well, Wray came on today and said this.
Did Crooks fire 8 shots?
We have recovered 8 cartridges on the roof.
Why was Crooks allowed to get off 8 shots?
Well, that I think is something we're still digging into.
Okay, so to me, especially when you analyze the acoustic signature of those 2 sets of shots, they are very, very different. And in my view, there is no chance that this kid, who had apparently no experience, knows that he was already compromised, according to the information that the local police had confronted him and then fell off. So he knew that he had been caught, that in a life and death shot, he's going to get off a kill shot on the very first shot. Seems very unlikely to me. But now then that they're saying that there were 8 shell casings on that rooftop, even though there were 9 shots that were actually fired, not 8, it just doesn't seem to pass the smell test to me. And to me, this is evidence that something is not right.
Well, I first have issue with what he said, because did they find cartridges or did they find shell casings? Because a cartridge is an intact shell casing with primer, bullet, and powder inside. That's a cartridge.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
That's not a shell casing. A shell casing is an empty shell where the primer has been struck and the bullet has left. So did they find shell casings or did they find cartridges? It's
a big difference.
Yeah, there is a big difference on that. And if he's using those terms interchangeably, it just shows what a dumbass he is when it comes to firearms. I mean, seriously, if you're going to be the FBI director, you ought to minimally know the difference between a shell casing and a cartridge or a round of ammunition. And you don't call it a bullet because a bullet is what comes out of a cartridge. That's number one. Number two, we got no accounting of how many shots did the counter sniper teams fire and how many counter sniper teams were there firing. Because as you correctly note, there are these audio recordings of these different shots. And so I haven't been that alarmed by them because, yeah, there were at least 2 different guns firing that day and maybe more, because I've heard that there was also another local police SWAT team, counter sniper team that was involved with firing. So that if that you got 3 guns right there right away, and there's nothing on those audio recordings that comes out and says, "Hello, the next sound you're going to hear is provided to you by Thomas Matthews Crooks, who's sponsored by Palmetto Arm," nothing like that. Okay. You don't get the pre-identification. Shots are shots, sounds are sounds. Then you've got to sit back in the investigation and sort out who took what shots. That said, I agree with you 1,000%. This stinks. This was not some lone wolf kid who turns out he is the master of the ninja universe. He built bombs that were in cars that could be remotely detonated. He's flying a drone an hour before the attack. He's able to shoot multiple rounds. Fortunately, only nicks the president or former President Trump. And he's able to evade detection up until the time he gets up on the roof. I mean, good Lord. How does he do it? Oh, and he's got encrypted accounts overseas. And so the thing smells. And the problem is the FBI has zero credibility. Zero.
Yeah.
They have sat on evidence with the Hunter Biden laptop. They lied with respect to FISA warrants to go after people surrounding Donald Trump and his campaign. They've done nothing to prove that they planted evidence at Donald Trump's residence with respect to going after classified documents. Yeah, no, FBI has no business being anywhere near this investigation. Neither should the Secret Service, but the good news is we got all this other evidence, which is clearly pointing to this was an organized plot to kill Donald Trump. And it was a plot that I think the kid was probably used. I'm not sure to how that happened.
Yeah.
But I think clearly we're looking, let's call him a patsy. That doesn't mean that he didn't fire the shots.
Right.
Right now, the best evidence we have in terms of if you look at the physical locations of the people who were shot, they all are in a line with where Trump was shot. Either they were downrange or uprange.
Uprange, right.
And so if that wasn't Crooks, then the question is, where could the other shooter have been? It wouldn't have been in the water tower because the water tower doesn't line up.
Yeah, the angles are not right.
The angles aren't right. So it's got to be something behind that. But when you look behind that, there's no easy position where somebody could be secreted. So, but it needs to be investigated, and it's up to Congress to put together a joint independent committee and to bring in. There are a number of retired, solid FBI and Secret Service agents who are not part of this new woke crowd, who can come in and do the job that it needs to be done. But this has to be done in an independent fashion because these people tried to kill Donald Trump.
We can't have another Warren Commission type where the administration that benefited from JFK's death ends up being in charge of all this stuff, and then just it's good to go. Don't ask any more questions here. It's got to be somebody who was not either has something to hide or had something to gain, and that's why I think an independent needs to be done. Because there are way too many questions here. But listen, we're actually going to touch on that. In fact, if anybody wants to join us at 4:00 today, We're going to have Tony Schaefer on to uncover some additional information that has been coming out today and more on the Ray testimony, what we know and what we still need to know. Kind of to your point there, we know some things, but there's a lot of things we don't, which are crucial and vital to finding out what happened and who may be behind it, because that is incredibly important. Because if it wasn't just this lone gunman situation here, if somebody was behind him, that means somebody is still out there, and Trump may well be at risk again. And we need to make sure that we get that identified very, very quickly. But thanks for coming on today. Always love having you on, especially with your shirts and your great assessments and your great analysis. Really appreciate you coming on today, Larry, and look forward to the next time you come back on.
Thank you, Danny.
All righty. And we thank you guys too. Remember, be sure and like and subscribe. And folks, come back at 4 o'clock today. Share this with your friends, because we're going to be showing you some new information that has come out just within the last 24 or so hours, as well as this testimony from the FBI director, probably even as we're still on the air here. So come back at 4 o'clock and we will see you on that episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.